Hello, everyone. Welcome to PolkaWorld Interview. This episode, we're going to dive deep into Moonbeam, the EVM-compatible chain that looking for bringing Ethereum functionality into Polkadot ecosystem. It's honored for us to have Derek, the founder of Moonbeam, to be here with us today. Welcome, Derek. And firstly, could you briefly introduce yourself and Moonbeam?
Of course, and thank you very much for having me on. So I'm Derek Yoo, the CEO of PureStake. PureStake is one of the development companies that's developing the technical protocol that underlies Moonbeam. And just a little introduction or background on myself. I've been working for a long time now, building software of different kinds, mostly in the Web 2, first Web 1 and then Web 2 space. I spent most of my career, but since the beginning of 2019, working in the Web 3 space, and shortly thereafter starting to work on the project Moonbeam. I think that maybe that is a little bit unique about myself and some of the rest of the team, is that a lot of us do have extensive experience building software companies and complex software systems from before Web3, and I think that's helped us quite a bit in the implementation of Moonbeam.
Why you decided to start Moonbeam, and how was the market background, and what problem did you find?
The project did start some time ago because we were working on it for at least a couple of years before it launched. It launched in January earlier this year. But even back when we started the project, there was a few ideas that we had that remain true today and that we still believe very much in. And so one of those ideas is that there's going to be many blockchains. Back in 2019 or the beginning of 2020, there was less than there are today, but we continue to see this growth in blockchains. And we're big believers in this, that there's going to be more and more blockchains, and particularly using these development frameworks that exist now to create blockchains. So there's really two. There's the Cosmos SDK and there's Substrate. There's these great frameworks you have for building blockchains are going to mean that there's more and more blockchains, more specialized chains out there. And so if you accept that idea that there's going to be many blockchains, then the next question that is not, that kind of comes up is, how do these blockchains communicate with each other? That's the critical capability, is, to almost network these community computers, to kind of, how is it that information and different things can flow between these different blockchains? And so that was the context when we started the project to say, okay, how do we think that's going to work? And this is what led us to Polkadot, because I think that that it has this very strong technology base that answers both of those questions. So there's Substrate that you can use to build your own blockchain, but then as part of the vision of Polkadot, there's this XCM technology that allows you to communicate very securely between different blockchains. So that was a really great fit for us, and for the idea of Moonbeam to be, let's call it a smart contract chain, but that is specifically designed for these cross-chain use cases, or to manage interactions between many different chains. And so that was a great fit for us, and we've then started working on the implementation of Moonbeam in Substrate to be part of the Polkadot ecosystem. And many other things have changed since then, but these original ideas of there being many chains, specialized chains, and being able to connect them and build apps that span functionality for multiple chains, that remains the same. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting areas right now in Web3 is these ideas that are now, all these technical capabilities are just now becoming usable by developers. And so I think it's a very exciting time in Web3 right now.
Moonbeam is the first EVM compatible chain in the Polkadot ecosystem, which rapidly grew in a very short time. What makes Moonbeam unique?
Yeah, this EVM compatibility. So that is, the first thing that Moonbeam was known for was, hey, this is the EVM compatible environment in Polkadot. And I would say that was an important first design goal for the system. So why, I guess is the question I've been asked before. So why EVM, why focus on that? The answer is pretty simple. And this, again, I'll say this comes from our experience building software in the Web 2 space. Key challenge when you're trying to build infrastructure that appeals to developers it's really not necessarily about the features of the infrastructure itself. So for the chains, it could be the speed or the security or other things. And those things are important, of course. But the key thing for adoption, I've seen in the past, is around the developer tools, right? So it's the tools and the environment that the developers use to create things. This is extremely important for getting developer adoption. And I think that one thing that many blockchain projects underestimate is how difficult it is to create these tools. And they kind of underestimate this, saying, hey, we have a better chain, we have a faster chain, but it's these tools are just as much, probably much more work than the actual chain itself to create all of these things. And so when we looked out at the market, I think we pretty quickly understood that the Ethereum as a chain and all of the developer tools that have been created in and around the Ethereum technology stack, those are by far like the best and the most mature, and it's still true today. Like those are like by far the most mature and capable tools, and there's the largest developer audience that knows how to use these tools. So I think that from our perspective, going down this EVM compatible path was it had the least friction, right? So if we were trying to get developer traction and get different kinds of protocols being developed on Moonbeam, this would be the least friction path, would be to support all of these Ethereum developer tools and infrastructure. And so that was a part of the strategy. The product strategy was, let's create like as compatible an environment as we can that will be able to use all of these different tools. And so that was really one of the first design goals of Moonbeam, it's optimized for compatibility with these different Ethereum tools. And I think it's largely worked, where that means that there's much, much less friction on onboarding developers. They already know how to use all these tools. They can take existing smart contracts from other platforms. They can, they can port those very easily to Moonbeam. We've seen that work. That's led to the growth of an ecosystem on Moonbeam of both developers and deployed protocols. And by the way, that's not just Moonbeam. That's also happened more broadly, right? You see that a lot of the other chains that have gotten traction outside of Ethereum are also EVM compatible chains, like Polygon, Avalanche's C chain, BNB chain, and so on, right? So it's not just, I think this idea, there's many people that have like understood this and taken a similar approach.
Yes. Okay, as you mentioned, beside the Polkadot ecosystem, Moonbeam is not the exclusive EVM compatibility chain that provides cross-chain solutions. There's a competition within this sector, and some of the EVM-based chains have more user adoption and dApps deployed. What is your strategy to attract developers and the EVM-based dApps building on Polkadot ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So I see the question as simply like, what is the differentiator for Moonbeam, right? So what is it that's different about Moonbeam that makes it unique and somewhere where developers would want to deploy? What unique problem does it solve? And so this base EVM compatibility, I would say, is a necessary ingredient, but it is not like, it doesn't answer that question, because as you point out, there's many EVM environments. Although I will tell you, even just that alone does lead to some traction, because there are project teams that are just want to get access to particularly assets in the Polkadot ecosystem. So things like DOT, assets from other parachains, from an EVM compatible environment. So I do think that there is, that leads to distraction on its own. We have seen a number of different protocols deployed to Moonbeam to be able to just access things like DOT, right? This is, for example, like the Lido deployment to create like a liquid staked version of DOT, ST DOT. Moonbeam was a good fit for that because it gave an EVM environment that could access DOT. But that being said, the thing that is special about Polkadot, I think, and like about Moonbeam, is around supporting these cross-chain scenarios. So like cross-chain interoperability scenarios. That's like one of the very key features of Polkadot that make it special is this XCM technology that allows you to send messages in between chains with very high security. And so that's really what Moonbeam is specializing in. The Moonbeam chain is specializing in this EVM compatibility, but also in this ability to support developers that are creating cross-chain, what we call cross-chain connected applications or cross-chain connected smart contracts. And that idea is a new idea. It uses the cross-chain messaging capability, like XCM. There are other messaging systems as well that allow smart contracts on Moonbeam to work with any asset, any user, any service on any blockchain, kind of regardless of where it is, using this cross-chain messaging technique. And what we're seeing right now is that this is a kind of a brand new capability, and there's project teams that are using this now to create new kinds of apps that I think are going to be leading a lot of change as they come to market. They have two features in particular, I think, that are the key drivers of this change. One feature that they have is they have this. They're more efficient than protocols that don't use this cross-chain messaging. And we can go into some examples and details of that, but there is this efficiency gain that you get from using cross-chain messaging that you can't get if you don't use it. And the second key reason why these cross-chain applications are getting and are going to get a lot of traction is around the user experience. They're able to offer a better user experience by using cross-chain messaging. And so for we see those two reasons as being key drivers for cross-chain connected applications. And we're, Moonbeam is specially kind of created to be able to support these. Part of that story is, of course, being a parachain on Polkadot allows developers on Moonbeam to access XCM messaging to connect to other parachains or other substrate-based chains.
Connected contracts allow apps built on Moonbeam to call any smart contract on any chain. What is that mean for end users? For example, bridges make it possible for people to transfer tokens to other chain. Anything we can do by using the connected contracts?
Yeah, I think this is the big shift that I was describing around this new development approach. And so let me describe it in a little bit more detail, like how that works, and use an example. So I think a good example is we have an integration and collaboration with the team at Osmosis. Osmosis is a standalone chain in the Cosmos ecosystem, implemented in the Cosmos SDK that has a DEX on it, a decentralized exchange. And so what they wanted is an ability for users to deposit DOT into their system. And so there's an integration now, and it works like this, that if you're a user on Osmosis and you say, hey, I want to deposit DOT into Osmosis, you get presented with a native DOT deposit address. So it's the same kind of address that you have on the Polkadot relay chain. And then as a user, you can move funds into that address and they'll get deposited into, for example, an LP, into a pool on Osmosis. So the interesting thing is what happens behind the scenes. So what the user just sees this very simple thing, but what happens behind the scenes is there's a movement to an account on the relay chain, on the Polkadot relay chain. That's detected and forwarded to Moonbeam then. So we have, using XCM. So using XCM, DOT from the relay chain can move to Moonbeam and it becomes XCDOT, we call it, on Moonbeam. That's like the kind of the version of DOT that's on Moonbeam. And then so that's an XCM kind of transit that happens there. Now from Moonbeam, it then is forwarded to Axelar. So Axelar is another cross-chain messaging system that has its own, ability to integrate other chains. So that currently connects Moonbeam and Osmosis, and called the Cosmos ecosystem. So then you have a movement of XCDOT across Axelar, from Moonbeam to Cosmos. And then on Cosmos, the Axelar system also has an IBC leg, right? So it can use IBC to move from the Axelar chain to Osmosis. So then there's an IBC leg of the transfer. And then once it gets to Osmosis, then there's an LP action that happens to LP that thing into the pool. And so it's a pretty there's many steps to this process. It's if you had to do all those by hand, this would be 10 steps, would be quite complicated. But the key thing here is that because you're using these cross-chain messaging techniques, the user doesn't have to know about any of those things, right? All these things are happening behind the scenes. There's several different chains being involved and several different messaging systems also being involved. You have XCM, Axelar, and IBC being used. But the user is presented with this very simple user experience. So I think that's one of those benefits I talked about in the previous question as to what it means for end users. What it means for end users is that they don't, this complicated infrastructure can be kind of hidden away from them. They don't need to necessarily understand all these steps or be involved in them. They can have this very simple user experience, even if there's many different specialized chains in the background that are working, to satisfy their needs. This is similar to how Web 2 applications work, right? You might have a very simple mobile app, but then behind the scenes, there's many servers, there's many things in the cloud that are supporting that application. So I think that's an important idea around what these cross-chain technologies mean for end users. You mentioned about bridges, and so I would say that that's another thing that I expect to change a lot. So today, the model that people have is, okay, I'm going to deploy a smart contract on a given chain, and then to use it, you have to bring your assets to the smart contract. So you're expected to use bridges to move the assets to be at the same place that the contracts are. But using cross-chain messaging, you don't have to move the assets anymore. You can leave the assets on whatever chain that they originated on, and you just send messages like around. So I'll give another example of a team that's deploying to Moonbeam to illustrate the point. So there's a team called Prime Protocol. They're deployed to Moonbeam. They're using this cross-chain connected approach. So what that means is they have contracts that are deployed on Moonbeam are kind of the master contracts. And then they have contracts on other chains that are like Avalanche, Ethereum mainnet, Polygon, and some other chains that are let's call it the branch offices. So then if a user deposits, let's say AVAX into the branch, the contract that's deployed on Avalanche, it doesn't move, it gets locked there, but then a message gets sent back to the Moonbeam contract to say, hey, this user deposited like this amount of AVAX on Avalanche. So you don't bridge, there's no bridge in that case, it's just the information is flowing back to Moonbeam. And so now, like in their system that is being, that they're working on, that user can go to mainnet, let's say, and they could say, okay, now I want to use that deposit. I want to mint stable coins based on that deposit. And that will check back with Moonbeam also and say, this user has credit. They've deposited this much AVAX on Avalanche. So now let's let them like mint like stable coins on Ethereum mainnet. And so you see this whole system is coordinated like with messages and then with this information that's on Moonbeam, these master set of contracts. But the tokens haven't moved, like nothing has moved anywhere. So I think this is another key thing that's going to create, there's going to be a big thing for developers creating these like connected like contract applications, because in this system you have like it's on many chains, but it's one system, right? It acts like one system instead of what you often see today is that you see someone will deploy the same contracts on every chain. So you have like multiple systems that are disconnected from each other, and that's going to be more efficient. This protocol I'm describing is going to be much more efficient than having a system where you have separate deployments of smart contracts that can't talk to each other on each chain.
I've noticed that Moonbeam cooperated with a lot of the third-party bridges, right? Mm-hmm. And so is that because you talked about the connected contract and that will be help the developers a lot. So that would influence the cooperation with that kind of bridges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, I make a distinction. So I make a distinction that a lot of the cross-chain use cases in the past have been about bridging assets. So this is where people almost think of cross-chain as equivalent to bridges. Mm-hmm. But there is a thing that's happened recently, which is that I think a lot of the smarter teams have realized that bridging assets is only one specific example of a broader like set of use cases, which involve the sending of messages between chains. And those messages could be for asset transfer, and then you're a bridge, but could be like the example I just gave, like where there's other kinds of information being sent between chains. And so there's a new class of interoperability protocols that are more generalized, right? They talk about just sending any kind of message between chains. XCM on Polkadot is one of those examples. IBC on Cosmos is another one of those examples. And there's several new important protocols that we're seeing get developer traction that connect Moonbeam to other destinations, like outside of the Polkadot ecosystem. So those would be things like Layer 0, Axelar, Wormhole, There's a number of protocols that are kind of more generalized and extending beyond what you can do with a bridge. And I think this is an exciting area right now because there's a lot of innovation happening, in this area. And developers probably need to use more than one of these. In the osmosis example I gave you, there was 3 different messaging systems used to achieve the end result that was described.
Yes, and you've mentioned layer 0 and because it's very famous, and for this one we can highlight the detail of cooperation, like what they can bring to Moonbeam, etc. Yeah,
so I think so I was describing that there's these different messaging systems. I've seen now that developers will likely need to use more than one of these systems to achieve their goals. So of course, XCM is special. I would say that Moonbeam has special access to XCM because Moonbeam runs as a parachain on Polkadot. And XCM is special because it has very good security properties because it's built into the Moonbeam chain itself, right? Into the base chain itself is this ability to send and receive XCM messages. That allows us to interact with other parachains on Polkadot, as well as other substrate-based logic. Now, I think the challenge though is that developers who are deploying smart contracts to these connected contracts to Moonbeam, they need to get to other destinations. So one of the important ones is Ethereum mainnet, right? So there's still a lot of important things that happen on Ethereum mainnet. And XCM, at least today, can't be used to get to Ethereum mainnet. And so I think that's really where a lot of these other messaging systems come in, like Layer 0. I mentioned Layer 0, Axelar, Wormhole. There's a number of them these days, but they offer the ability to send messages to other non-Polkadot destinations. So that's Cosmos, Ethereum mainnet, Polygon, BNB chain. We're seeing developers kind of use these systems to reach a number of other destinations. And I think that the end result is that you really can use smart contracts from Moonbeam can connect to any other smart contract on any other chain using one or another of these different messaging systems. And Layer 0 is an important one of those. I would say it's one of the ones that has gotten the most developer traction to date, helping developers connect across these different blockchains.
Okay, and with the emerging of blockchain infrastructures such as Aptos and Sui, developers seems to be very happy in looking for opportunities in those newly launched platforms. Any potential impact on the development of the Moonbeam network?
Yeah, so these new chains, Move is quite interesting as a language. It is Rust-based. Those chains are optimized more for higher transaction throughput than you could find perhaps in an EVM, right? EVM in general is more designed for functionality and not necessarily for throughput. And so I think that these, there's certain kinds of use cases that will be well served using Move on platforms like Aptos or Sui. Now, I think that the vision I have is that there's many different specialized chains that are going to emerge that will be good at different use cases. And it's this ability to connect between chains that allows for that specialization, because then, as a chain, you can say, hey, I'm going to be great at this use case. Let's say it's high transaction throughput scenarios, but maybe for other scenarios, I'm not going to be as good, right? For general purpose or for, EVM compatible scenarios, I'm not going to be as good. And this is where the connectivity becomes quite important, because then, a developer can use, the chain, any given chain for what it's good at, but then can, use other chains, for, different things that, that chain isn't good at. So my vision is that as a developer, you'll combine functionality from multiple chains to get the best of all worlds, right? You'll be able to combine specialized functionality from different chains, like an Aptos or a Sui, combined with, let's say, a Moonbeam, to create something that's, takes the best of both of those environments and offers it to the user in the form of an application. And the user may not even know that they're interacting with, these different blockchains behind the scenes. That's from the osmosis example I gave.
Community development is very important to move forward the widely used scenarios. The fact is that Web3 needs more developing power from the Web2 areas. However, Rust is the most widely used coding language compared with Solidity in Web2 from the perspective of developing a language. So do you think that's going to be a hurdle of Moonbeam to attract more developers from Web2?
Yeah, it's a good question. I still would say that Solidity and the Ethereum tech stack is like the most widely adopted Web3 technology and is the easiest way to get at even Web2 developers. The reason being that, if you are a Web2 developer and you're looking to learn about Web3, there's like a huge amount of educational materials, tutorials, other things that help teach you how to program on Ethereum. And those can be applicable to Moonbeam. So I still see that as probably the easiest and best onboarding path right now. Now you mentioned Rust. I think Rust is like an interesting language. We've used Rust ourselves, like in the implementation of Moonbeam and Substrate. Or Substrate is a Rust-based framework. And I think this is really like one of the powerful things about Polkadot is that you can use Rust and Substrate to express blockchain logic that is hard to express like in Solidity-based smart contracts, right? So Solidity smart contracts are great, but there are certain things that that are not that well suited to like an EVM deployment. And this is an area where we're actually doing like R&D work right now. Obviously the idea of Polkadot is that you could use Substrate to express, some set of logic, and then you can link it using connected contracts. You can link it into like smart contracts around Moonbeam. And so we see that as a very complementary thing. And ultimately, this is going to be a very great differentiator for Moonbeam is that you can use a combination of Solidity and Rust and Substrate to power your application. And so I think, that's something that I think will make for a very kind of unique and powerful combination.
You've mentioned in the previous question that maybe the Move language and the other language, they could be used for different scenarios. And Sean from Parity used to mention that parachains should focus on their specific scenarios instead of bridging tokens only. What are the best use scenarios for Moonbeam recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I was saying, the specialization of Moonbeam is in compatibility. So this is in EVM compatibility, being able to provide this full EVM compatible environment that supports all of the Ethereum tools, but to extend that EVM environment with cross-chain support, XCM among others. And so I see Moonbeam as, in the long term being kind of a messaging hub, right? So it's a place where there's a lot of cross-chain messages are coming and being handled on Moonbeam. And right now I think even from what I see in the first 7 months of Moonbeam, it's extremely likely that Moonbeam will continue to play this key role within Polkadot, where it's one of the main venues where there's a lot of DeFi and other kinds of applications. So if you're another parachain on Polkadot, I think it's going to make a lot of sense to have XCM integrations to move assets or to perform other kinds of scenarios with Moonbeam, given that that's where a lot of the economic activity is taking place, within the context of the Moonbeam EVM. I do think though that there's opportunity for other parachains, and like I said, we're in the kind of early stages of thinking about this, that could provide different capabilities that would support Moonbeam. And so I take Sean's point that one of the core ideas of Polkadot is to allow for an environment where you can have specialized chains, and that you want to use these specialized chains together to create something that is larger than any one of them, right? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that's very much how I would like to see Moonbeam play a role in that kind of picture, where let's say you have a smart contract on Moonbeam that's interacting with many different specialized chains on Polkadot, but is able to then create an application that scales and provides rich functionality to the user, but behind the scenes is being powered by many blockchains, right? It might be 5, 6 blockchains that are powering that application, but the user won't necessarily know about that.
what's your priority focus for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think there's really two big things that are being worked on right now. And so one of them is around these cross-chain scenarios I've been mentioning. Taking just the example of Polkadot and XCM, there are a number of XCM channels that are already open on Moonbeam to other parachains. There's already this initial XC20 integration, so that's a token integration that allows for movement of parachain tokens to Moonbeam and back to the Moonbeam EVM. That is proven to be a very popular feature. A lot of development teams have adopted this technique or this integration. But there are more functional scenarios being worked on now. So one of the key ones is the ability to send and receive XCM messages as a developer and map them to a smart contract on Moonbeam. So there's several teams that are already implementing this. We're doing work with Centrifuge, with Oak. There's several Manta. There's several parachain teams that are already using this functionality, which will be kind of in production shortly. To do more functional scenarios. And so that's, I'd say that's definitely an area of focus and really illustrates the power of Polkadot. I would say that the second area where there's a lot of activity these days is around kind of community-led governance, like of Moonbeam. So this is very recently we had a community member proposed a new grants process, and so that was passed. And so now there's kind of new proposals that are like being worked on that would use this new grants process. That's a kind of a community-led effort for ecosystem teams within the Moonbeam ecosystem to request grant support. And I expect there's more and more of these kind of community-led like efforts around governance of the chain and around grants. That's another area of focus to help support the Moonbeam ecosystem.
Amazing. As our interview drawing to the end, anything you would like to add?
I would just say that obviously I think it's a very exciting time, where there's a lot of new technologies that have just become available this year. Like in 2022, there's these new cross-chain technologies are all basically new, and that's a huge opportunity. I think developers that take the time to understand these technologies and what they make possible, there's going to be big opportunities for new protocols that use these techniques to be, like I said, more efficient and have better user experiences than what exists today. And so I think that, that's an opportunity for developers. And so I think in the context of Polkadot, that's, building a new specialized parachain, or that could be building a cross-chain connected application on Moonbeam that uses these techniques. That's if I were just a developer, that's what I would be working on now, is basically using these new capabilities to do something really interesting.
Okay, thank you so much. We will definitely keep an eye on Moonbeam, but we would love our audience to feedback. What do you think of Moonbeam? Where do you think it headed? Challenges it might face in the future? You can leave your comment, and see you soon.